I'm just going to introduce Molly, although we have a panel tonight. So Molly is in the Conservation Capacity and Leadership Program Director at Denver Zoo. And remember, a lot of these zoos put a lot of money towards Africa for the conservation that we run here. She's worked in zoos and in conservation for almost 30 years now, and much of her career has included working in Southern Africa, focusing on conservation capacity and carnivore and vulture conservation. Her focus is on working with both emerging conservation practitioners, and you will meet some of these. I am leaving her to introduce Tinker and James in the panel, and to support conservation capacity needs to help them access resources, tools, and networks that they will need to amplify their conservation efforts. She's a conservation coach in the conservation standards for the practice of conservation, and she enjoys facilitating teams and individuals in their conservation planning process. And finally, she's co-chair of the African Vulture SAFE program with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and a member of the IUCN Vulture Specialist Group. So she is coming to us with so much knowledge. So with that, Molly, it is over to you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Holly, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I know I'm speaking for myself and my colleagues who are joining us today that we're extremely grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you all about the role of zoos. We recognize there's still a lot maybe unknown about the current role of the modern zoo, but we also recognize that there's probably a lot of opinions and maybe some misunderstandings about zoos. So what we're hoping for today is that we can open this up for a very rich discussion about what your questions are around zoos. But also we hope that we will bring a great new deal of knowledge to your understanding of the scope and scale of what zoos are currently doing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here before I introduce my colleagues. So before we jump in, I do want to recognize my two colleagues who are joining me today, Dr. James Musinguzi, the Executive Director for the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, and Tinka John with Unite for the Environment, a conservation organization also based in Uganda. So before we start, I do want to also recognize that this is a very large topic, and we're probably not going to get to everything today. But hopefully today will be a strong foundation for the evolution of zoos, where we started, where we are now, but specifically about the role of zoos in partnerships and conservation efforts in Africa. And so you're going to hear from my colleagues who will be able to share that firsthand. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. So again, you heard just a little bit about me, my backstory. So I am in Denver Zoo in Denver, Colorado. So that is in the bit of the western part of the United States. I'm the Conservation Capacity Leadership Program Director. So what that means is I sit within our field conservation department at our zoo. And so I support all of those practitioners, whether they be our own staff or our partners that we work with in Colorado or around the world. I work with the practitioners to make sure they have all of the resources, the access to resources in order to elevate and amplify the work that they're already doing on the ground. I've been in zoos almost my entire career. So if this was not a field that I strongly believed in, I would not be in this field. But my career has evolved quite a bit. I started out as an animal care professional, and then I gravitated towards conservation education and capacity building. So although I love animals and I love wildlife, I find I thrive most when I can work with people to help them in their conservation efforts. And then also, like Holly said, I do have a bit of a love for vultures, especially Africa's vultures. So I am a member of the IUCN Vulture Specialist Group, and then vice chair of the African Vulture SAFE program, which is a conservation initiative under the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which I'm actually going to talk a bit more about in my presentation. So here, where am I right now? I am at the zoo right now. And so this is where I am located in relation to Africa right now. So we are in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and believe it or not, we've actually had our first snow of the season. So it is getting colder here. So before we can really talk about the modern zoo, where zoos are right now, we really must recognize the origin stories of zoos and those colonial roots. I think that's an important part for us to start today, because this is not something that we should be denying or shying away from. This is part of our story, and zoos are not always good about telling the full story of us. So I would like to start there. So zoos obviously have evolved quite a bit. The very first zoo was established in 1752 in Vienna, Austria. And it really was that throughout Western civilization, humans have had this fascination with animals and the exoticness that they bring. This fascination was no more relevant than in the West, where the creation of zoological gardens started. And at the same time, it must be recognized that botanical gardens and later aquariums were established. But zoos were at the center of elite societies, and attendance and membership to these gardens really became those coveted indicators of high society. So it really wasn't about the individual animal, it was about the status that came with being able to see these animals in captivity. So while European countries were colonizing continents such as Africa, India, and South America, not only were they colonizing the people, they were also colonizing the natural resources there. And that, of course, included wildlife. So trophy hunting expeditions soon expanded to be expeditions to extract live wild species to be brought back to Europe, to be put on display for royal families and for those elite members of society. So that fascination really is where the origin stories of zoos started. However, that is not the practice, nor is that the role of zoos anymore. But that purpose that zoos served did expand the 1700s, 1800s, and early into 1900s. I also want to recognize that the information I'm providing right now is really coming from the global north perspective. My colleagues are going to be able to give you a much more rich understanding of the role of zoos and African zoos. So I do want to recognize that. So here we are. Zoos have had to evolve. There's been many social and ecological influences throughout several decades that have forced the evolution of zoos. And that includes the environmental movement throughout the global north. And that also would include when women got the votes to write. So all of these social influences that were also paralleling the evolution of the conservation field really did force zoos to take a hard look at the role and purpose they were not only serving in society, but to conservation. And we are a complex type of organization. We are not like a Conservation International or the World Wildlife Fund or the Nature Conservancy, where our sole purpose is conservation. We have many identities and we serve many purposes. And we are also a business. So much of what we do is mission driven, but we are very heavily reliant on people who come through our gates to visit our organizations. So most zoos are not what we call nonprofits. Therefore, the revenue that is generated from those ticket sales goes right back into our operating budget. So that usually entails that money goes to paying staff salaries, as well as caring for the animals that we have. So there are business decisions that coincide with those mission-led initiatives that we stand for. So we do not shy away from that. We do have to keep our doors open and keep the animals in our care and the animals that we're committed to in the utmost highest care. So there is that to adds to the complexity of the type of organizations that we are. Now, it's also really important to note that not all zoos are alike, and that there is a difference between what we call an accredited zoo and a non-accredited zoo. So first of all, what do I mean by accredited? So accreditation means that there are certain standards and protocols that have to be met in regards to animal welfare, care, management, and that includes their living environments, so the exhibits in which we build for them, the social groupings, so how we house animals, how many do we house if there are multi-species in one living environment, their health and nutrition. So we really do look at the whole animal. There are standards for how we are caring for the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the animals in our care. But on top of that, there are standards for veterinary care, for our involvement in conservation, our research, education, safety, and even guest services. So we are required to adhere to these standards in order to remain accredited. Now, not all zoos have to be accredited. Our zoo does not partner or collaborate with non-accredited zoos because we need to ensure that any partnerships or collaborations that those zoos we want to work with are also adhering to those same high-level standards. Now, there's different accrediting bodies that set those standards. So for North America, it is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is what my zoo falls under. There's also the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So that would be any accredited zoo around the world, including Africa. But Africa has its own accrediting body, and James can speak a little bit more to that. And then there's the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And I think it's also important to recognize that these are our community of practice. So we partner and we collaborate with all of these accrediting bodies to advance us as organizations, to make sure we are pushing the standards in themselves. We want to make sure that we are providing the absolute highest quality for the animals in our care, but also for the visitors who come through our gates. So these associations, this is one large community right here that we always are collaborating with and learning from each other to really make sure that we continue to evolve. So as I mentioned, zoos are really unique organizations because we aren't just conservation. If you were to ask what is the current definition of a zoo, you might say it's an organization that means a collection of animals to serve conservation purposes, education purposes, animal health purposes, and possibly also research. But we are so much more than that. But because we serve so many purposes, we have many different identities. And because we have many different identities, that means we have to balance a lot of different value systems within our own organization, but the value systems of those that come through our gates. We want to recognize that people come to us for a variety of reasons. We cannot expect that everyone comes to us for the priority purpose of seeing animals or to learn about animals or to even learn about conservation. In many reasons, zoos are the safest place that many people come to engage with their family or to engage with nature. Many zoos in the global north are in urban areas. So zoos do offer safe areas for people to come and recreate with their families. And that is as much of a priority to us as someone coming to us to learn on how to take conservation action. So when you're balancing that many diverse value systems, it does become a little bit trickier in order to set a priority to conservation because we can't put all of our resources towards that. However, our zoo is very unique in the sense that we have a dedicated department to field conservation, so the work happening outside our gates. Not all zoos are able to do that. Not all two zoos are alike. And so we all leverage the resources that we have where we can, and that is part of that business model that I spoke about. So what are those different purposes that zoos, the modern zoo does serve right now? So we've talked a little bit about animal care and welfare. And that, when I talk about animal care and welfare, I'm talking about husbandry, so how we are just maintaining our collections. I would also include exhibit design. So how are we working with architects and engineers to build the highest quality enclosures that foster the most natural animal behavior from our animals? Veterinary medicine, so making sure that we can provide the highest quality health care on our campuses. That also, though, includes partnerships with universities and other veterinary organizations to provide resources that we might not be able to do that. Breeding programs, which I'm going to expand upon about in just a moment. Conservation education, research, and that research can span from social science research, reproductive medicine, field conservation research, behavioral husbandry, so understanding more animal behavior from the animals in our own care and how that might help us learn more in the wild, and vice versa. What can we learn from animals in the wild and bring that back to elevate the care that we can provide? Advocacy, how can we possibly support or influence our guests and our partners in their civic ability to influence voting behavior or even legislation on behalf of biodiversity? And then, of course, conservation, which is why we're here today. And I'm going to expand a bit on that. So as you can see, there's many hats that zoos wear. Not all zoos are able to meet all of these purposes. Some have expertise in others. But what it does demonstrate is that, again, we are complex and we are diverse, and we have come quite a long way when you think about the origin stories of zoos. So the different types of conservation work or efforts that zoos can do. The first one is what we call ex situ conservation. So this would be the efforts regarding our own campuses, our own organizations. So there is captive breeding programs for genetic management. So zoos do have highly regulated and managed breeding programs to ensure captive populations have genetic diversity, should we ever need to rely on them, should populations in the wild plummet. So when I talk about them being heavily managed, I mean that. I think about it as a dating app or matchmaker.com for animals. There are individuals who are responsible for maintaining the genetic databases for all species in zoos. So zoos are not breeding for the sake of breeding. There are many different decision-making filters that go into place before decisions like that get made. First one is genetic diversity. We want to avoid any overbreeding or inbreeding of any species, but also space. Is there space should there be offspring resulted from these breeding programs? And if certain zoos do not have the space to house these animals, then breeding will not occur. So it is heavily managed because it is about the ultimate care and welfare for the animals that we have made a lifelong commitment to. So from birth to death, zoos are committed to the entire life cycle of those species. There's biobanking. So not only are we preserving captive populations, genetic diversity through those breeding programs, but also some zoos are able to cryogenically preserve genes, tissue samples, blood, semen, other forms of DNA. Again, should populations in the wild plummet, then we have preserved specimens in our facilities should we need to use them. And then there's captive breeding for this purpose of reintroduction. Again, not all zoos do this, not all zoos are equipped to do this, but breeding programs for the sole purpose of replenishing wild populations. Again, that genetic diversity is extremely important here, and it is heavily managed. And that also would involve a lot of other collaboration and partnerships with other If it's in the United States, other state and possibly federal organizations. If it's other countries, then working with those governments and those wildlife authorities. So this is not a program or decisions that are made in a vacuum. These do require a great deal of collaborations and collective efforts. And then there's research that happens on our own campuses. My zoo in particular, we will test out equipment on our animals here before they be taken into the wild, primarily radio collars or solar panel backpacks to track vultures. We are able to test them here on the animals in our care to ensure their safety, and that we, as the staff who would need to manage that equipment, know how to do that. And so we're able to conduct that kind of research, or animal behavior studies, or any other research that would help further the field. And then there's in situ conservation. So this is the conservation work that takes place outside of our campus, whether it be, in our case, locally here in Colorado, or even around the world. And that can involve species recovery, so looking at wild populations, habitat and landscape protection and restoration. If land is being converted for a variety of reasons, how can we collaborate with other partners in order to restore those landscapes? Community engagement and education, which I'm going to leave to my colleagues to expand more on. Capacity building, which is my role, where I'm working with partners and those field-based practitioners to make sure they have what they need in order to amplify their efforts. And then there's funding. Some zoos, that is their role in conservation, because they are not in a place to provide these other resources, but they can provide funding for some of their partners to do those conservation efforts. So again, I want to emphasize, not all zoos have the ability to do the scope and scale of conservation work that I've outlined here, but then some do. So we've talked a little bit about the value that zoos bring from a conservation standpoint, especially field conservation. But I think in order for us to make that ask of those who are coming through to our gates, we have to build a foundation. And so there's a strong social value to zoos that I think is really important, and maybe gets not really recognized that much. And that's on us as well. Zoos are not the best at telling our own stories. So when we think about those that are coming to our campus for whatever reason, going back to those value systems, we do see this as an opportunity for them to create connections with the ambassadors that are in our care and how they represent their wild counterparts. We can foster empathy by telling their individual stories and also sharing what are the threats facing their wild cousins. We can also build a conservation ethos. So we can start to build those foundational moments and elements that would hopefully help foster a longer ability to want to take conservation action. We have a very unique set of resources that, as we've talked about, we have veterinary care, reproductive care, exhibit design resources, animal care and welfare in the animal care professionals that work with us. We are strong partners and collaborators. We bring a lot of these resources, but we are also making sure that we are aligning our best practices with that of global frameworks, of conservation planning best practices, so that we are also walking the talk of our global partners. But I think one of the most important things that we don't maybe leverage enough, or that others don't see us as what we can bring to the table, is our zoo has over 1 million visitors that come to us every year. So that's over 1 million opportunities to create all of these things that I just spoke about. We need to leverage the platform that our campuses can provide in education, awareness, creating those moments, those experiences for our guests, so that hopefully they will leave wanting to come back or leave wanting to take action. So we need to leverage the ambassadors who are coming through to our gates. And I think that is a platform that sometimes gets overlooked, that zoos can bring to a partnership or a collaboration. But we also recognize that we still have work to do. We've come a very long way from our origin story. And there's still a lot, though, that we can do to make sure we are not perpetuating those colonial systems or those patriarchal systems that we are so deeply rooted in. And we are working hard to do that. It's really important that we remain relevant. So it is difficult for our guests in Denver to understand the relevance in their world when we are talking to them about African lions, but we can bring it back to Colorado. We can find those parallels. We can help them understand the impact they can have on their own backyard. And we are doing the same in our own programs. We are putting a lot more emphasis in our conservation efforts in Colorado. We can make sure we're more inclusive. You know, for so long, it was dictated who could do conservation, what conservation looked like. And so we are really trying to do a better job of making sure we're not perpetuating those systems that disconnected and removed people from nature in order to protect nature. And that even starts in who we hire in our own organization. And walking our talk, so making sure that everything we say we're going to do, we actually do it. We're thinking about revisioning how we can revision our conservation investment. So zoos are notorious for providing one-off grant proposals in small amounts that may help in the short term, but organizations and practitioners, they need long-term sustainable funding. And so I think we can do better at rethinking how we financially support and invest in conservation efforts. We have a lot of untapped potential that we still need to leverage. And I think it's also important that zoos and botanical gardens and aquariums are also finally getting more recognition in the global conservation community. The IUCN, so the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, has just released a position statement through their Species Survival Commission on the value of zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens. So I think the momentum is growing and evolving as well of the role, the valuable role that zoos can play and are playing right now. But I still think we have some work to do, and we're going to get there because this is a collective effort. The field of conservation is smaller than we think it is, but the threats to facing wildlife are accelerating. So we really do need all hands on deck, and zoos want to be there to support. So we are getting there, but I know there's a lot of work we can all still do together. So this concludes my portion. And so my colleagues are now really going to be able to do a much stronger job of digging in on how zoos are building the next generation of conservation leaders. How are we changing generational mindsets about zoos? And also, what are some of those case studies where we have seen conservation success? As we know, success in conservation means change. And in conservation, that also means social change. And that's where zoos have evolved quite a bit. There's been a social revolution in zoos. And I think we're still evolving. So we hope you stay with us and support us. So with that, there's my contact information if you do want to reach out and further discussions offline. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, James, who's going to dazzle you because he's wonderful.
Okay, thank you very much, Malo. Yes, I am Dr. James Msinguzi from Uganda. I am the Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, found in Entebbe in Uganda. And those are my contacts in case you want to contact me. Okay, so like I've just said, I'm the Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center. I'm also privileged to be the Chairman of the Pan-African Association of Zoos and Aquariums, a body that brings together all zoos in Africa, that tries to work hard to maintain standards in zoos and try and keep up animal welfare standards. I'm also the chairman of the Chimpanzee Sanctuary and Wildlife Conservation Trust Board of Trustees in Uganda. I'm also a reviewer of the Uganda National Journal of Education and Assessment in Uganda. I'm also an examiner at Makerere University, and I possess over 15 years of experience in strategic training, management, leadership, governance, sustainability, as well as environment and social governance. That is me. So, building on what Malo has talked about in terms of the zoos, because one of the challenges we have is that many people, either in this audience or outside there, still have the traditional stereotypes. They have the image of a zoo where animals are in cages, animals don't have access to any degree of freedom. But I want to stand here and tell you that we've evolved. Many zoos have evolved from traditional zoos to actually modern centers of excellence, recreating natural ecosystems. There is an effort now in zoos to ensure we mimic the environment that is in the wild, so that the animal can be able to be in a zoo, but has got access to adequate animal welfare. Many zoos now are members of the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, as well as Regional Zoo Association. And these associations are good at regulation of standards in zoos, accrediting these zoos to make sure they live up to the standards. Animal welfare strategy. We have the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums that developed the animal welfare strategy. We were just last week in San Diego, USA, trying to look at the regional associations that have actually met the animal welfare strategy goal of 2023. And these institutions, including my regional association, the Pan-African Association of Zoos and Aquariums, was singled out as having met the animal welfare strategy goal, meaning that a lot of work is being done in the zoos in America, in Europe, in Asia, and Africa to ensure that we meet the animal welfare needs. And when I talk about animal welfare, I basically mean us as individuals or animal keepers, or us who are taking care of these animals, putting ourselves in the position of these animals. We empathize with them to make sure that they have access to the 5 degrees of freedom. They should be free from hunger and thirst. They should be free from discomfort. They should be free from pain. They should be free from injury and disease, as well as have freedom to express natural behavior. So a lot of effort is being done in the zoos to ensure this happens. Efforts like enrichment, you'll find animal exhibits in zoos which have swings, they have platforms that help these animals do exercise. So they have hiding places where they can go and breed. So the World Association of Zoos and Aquaria also developed the conservation strategy that guides us to be able to support conservation, especially the one plan approach, where we promote both conservation in captive facilities, but also in the wild. There is also a code of ethics that was actually approved at the WAZA annual general meeting last week in USA, that we have to follow. We must follow legal compliance, especially in decision making. So there are so many standards that we must follow in order for us to make sure that the animals in our care are well looked after in terms of animal welfare, but also animal care, because the two are totally different. Animal care talks about husbandry, as well as welfare talking about the 5 degrees of freedom that I've just enumerated. Zoos are working hard to halt extinction through the Reverse the Red initiative, working with the IUCN. The zoos are now acting as centers of excellence in terms of setting up Reverse the Red initiatives as centers, where we are working with IUCN to increase the survival of particular species. Species have been listed, the IUCN red listing mode, and so there are initiatives in zoos to make sure that species are downlisted from the highest degree of being extinct, so that they are downgraded and they can be able to survive more. There are also efforts towards population management, working we have set up species survival specialist groups working with IUCN. There are study books that are maintained in zoos to make sure that there's population management, there is genetic diversity, exchange of animals between and among zoos to ensure that there is genetic diversity and good life of the animals. You are avoiding breeding. So there is also a lot of work in zoos where zoos are participating both in situ and ex situ. ex situ is in the captive wildlife facilities where they are, then in situ is in the wild. In fact, as we talk now, funding conservation worldwide, zoos and aquariums are the third largest funder of conservation in the world. And so zoos and aquariums are playing a very big role. When we talk about zoos and aquariums, over 700 million people at the moment visit zoos and aquariums every year. And when I talk about 700 million people, I mean a tenth of the world population is visiting zoos and aquariums. So you can see how zoos are best positioned and powerful to influence, to inspire the visitors to these zoos for them to be able to promote positive conservation action towards species, towards the various wild animals in our care, but also the environment in general. Studies also show that most of the tourists that are visiting natural landscapes have actually visited zoos and aquaria. They want to go and see the animals in the wild after being inspired in the zoo setting where they have visited. So about my institution, the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, it was established in 1952 as an animal orphanage. In the 1960s, it evolved into a traditional zoo where we even had exotic animals like tigers and bears. And then in 1994, it became a trust. And in 2015, it became a statutory body established by an act of parliament. In 1994, becoming a trust, the center was re-established from a traditional zoo to a wildlife conservation education center, working with the New York Zoological Society then, which is the Wildlife Conservation Society today, and the government of Uganda, where it was deemed fit to set up an institution whose mission was basically to educate Ugandans and visitors about the value of conserving biodiversity, with special emphasis on the young generation, who are very good at influencing adults who are our leaders that are going to be influential. And so this is the mission. So in 2015, it became a statutory body established by an act of parliament, thereby bestowing more powers and objectives onto the institution to be able to play a critical role of conservation education, where we emphasize environmental education and education for sustainable development. We do rescue and rehabilitation of wildlife. In fact, at our center, about 70% of the species have been rescued from illegal activity. We also do captive breeding of endangered wildlife species, but also edutainment. When the young generation comes, they study, they go through the Children's Zoo Discovery Center, they go through the learning from the known animals, domestic animals, to the wild animals. We take them through the center. After that, we take them to the children's play area where they play and relax. So one of our greatest role or objective is education or awareness creation. As you can see, we have a policy of connecting the young ones to nature, where we teach them about the adaptations of particular animals to survive in the environment. And this complements their curriculum in the schools. So they come to the center and we take them through a practical approach of education. They get connected to nature and actually now get inspired to do something for nature. We also promote conservation actions through on-site and extension services. When you come to UWEC or Entebbe Zoo or Wildlife Center in Entebbe, we have a robust on-site conservation education program where we focus on species. So we have species specific and then landscape specific, as well as conservation challenge specific education programs, which we take through the visitors who come to the center. At the moment, we have exceeded the 500,000 mark of visitors who visit this center. But also we go out through an outreach program where we promote outreach services to prioritize threatened, rare, and endemic species as listed under the IUCN Red List. You can see in the photo there, that is our outreach ridge van, where we go out, especially around protected areas in schools with audio-visual materials. We open that screen and educate and have an interactive session with our audiences. And through that, we work on their minds, actions, and behavior towards positive conservation action through quizzes, through debates. We also carry out education where we get knowledge, skills, and values imparted into the learners, where we affect their attitudes and emotions towards positive behavior of conservation. And this behavior then contributes to the actions that lead to positive conservation of the wildlife. So we have our motto, the CUA approach, where we educate through connection, understanding, and acting. Working with zoos worldwide through a twinning approach, we are working with Zoos Australia, and we are promoting the connect, understand, act approach. We want the learners or the visitors to the zoo to connect with the wildlife. Let them understand what's the ecology of this wildlife. What are the challenges that they go through? What can you do to reverse the rate? What can you do to increase the survival of this species? And then you act on it. So we emphasize the connection through the wildlife when they come and see, they understand these issues and then are able to act on them. Experiences that inspire learners to want to know more about the world. But also they ask questions, they sing, they dance, they do poems through an interactive session. We also support the national school curriculum through conservation education materials production. We developed the National Conservation Education Strategy for Uganda that is now being used, that is rolled out to other conservation actors to support conservation in the country. Through the CUA approach, connect, understand, and act, we act in a consolidated way where skills and knowledge through real-world context are learned with the animals in their face. We then call them to action. For example, grow a tree as opposed to planting a tree. Grow a tree, in other words, plant it and see to it that it grows, especially during your birthday, your marriage ceremony, as a way of remembering. Then you are contributing to wildlife habitats restoration. You are contributing to averting the effects of climate change. Visiting a conservation area, you create awareness, say no to bushmeat, manage your waste better. We also promote the concept of recycle, reuse, refuse through the on-site program, but also our community programs. And people who come to the center, we have a program where we have tree nurseries, trees of indigenous nature, fruit trees, medicinal trees, and these trees are given to the visitors who come, especially schools, where they go and establish these schools, in these gardens in their schools, and we follow up to monitor to see how these trees are doing. And through this, we are contributing to wildlife habitats, we are contributing to averting of effects of climate change. And of course, we have very many messages. You know, our wildlife cannot be replaced once lost. And this is at the zoo when you come, and that will have an impact emotionally on the visitor, and then it will trigger action. And we do actually a pre-visit evaluation when they come, and when they are going, we have a survey machine, which gives us the impact of their visit at the zoo, where we measure the effect on their emotions, on their conservation action. And actually, we've got very positive responses as they go out. I'm going to do ABCD for the environment because I've been impacted in this area A, B, C, and D, and that is actually working. So we also do rescue, rehabilitation, and release of wildlife. We've just released 56 endangered gray parrots that were confiscated from a trafficker between the Uganda and Congo border. We have just reintroduced them in 2023 in Chibale National Park, and we are actually having a strong monitoring program working with various partners in Chibale, and this is helping to support. We have also teamed up with the Japanese colleagues through Japanese International Cooperation Agency and Chubu University in Japan, where we are studying the breeding behavior of parrots, but also reintroducing these parrots back into the wild, because parrots are some of the highly trafficked birds as well as pangolins. So we get so many from the airport and other areas. So we need to understand their ecology, their breeding patterns, how to support them in terms of enrichment. So we do study them. This is a table that shows you the number of animal species and individuals rescued over the last 5 years at the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center. You can see that the last year, 2022, we rescued a total of 464 animals. We rescue them, bring them to the center. We have a team of 3 veterinary doctors. We have animal caregivers. We have educators. When these animals are brought to the center, they are cared for. We treat them. We have a fully fledged hospital. we examine them, and rehabilitate them for a period of time. Once we make an assessment that they are now good to go, we reintroduce them back into the wild. And working with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, they have an ecological monitoring program where we work with them to monitor these animals that we have reintroduced back into the wild. How are they doing? Do they need more intervention? And so the ecological monitoring program supports us. And the role of partnerships has been very key in terms of what we do. We partner so much with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, other institutions in the country, other institutions abroad, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, Chubu University, Victoria Zoos, and many others. We work together, the Paradise Wildlife Park, Chester Zoo, and this is helping us to improve capacity to manage the welfare of our animals. We have an animal rescue ambulance. As you have seen, 464 animals. We need quick intervention to make sure the animal is rescued when it is still okay. Now, this ambulance helps us to respond in real time. This ambulance was donated to us by the Paradise Wildlife Park in the UK through our strong partnerships. And these rescues come up as a result of the increased effects of poaching in landscapes, but also human-wildlife conflicts, where the animals find themselves in conflict with the communities. And so for us to be able to come in and mitigate some of the effects of these conflicts, we rescue these animals, bring them to the center. We rehabilitate cannot survive on their own in the wild, stay at the center or at UEC for purposes of education and being ambassadors of those in the wild. Because you cannot take back an animal which does not have a leg, for example. You are sending it to die. So by staying here, you are giving it another chance to live. We are also acting as the CITES Wildlife Center for Uganda. In other words, all the wild animals that are going out of the country are supposed to go through the current, the center. All those that have been rescued are supposed to come through the center for examination. We get samples from them and know that they have no disease before we can be able to introduce them back into the wild. But we also a CITES rescue center for the country. In other words, the animals that are confiscated from the airport, we are 15 minutes from the airport by drive. And so we get a lot of live confiscations of animals that are going out, but also artifacts, animal artifacts and animal parts. So they come to the center and we use them. Some are exhibits in court cases. And so we act as the custody for these species before we decide either to take them back into the wild or to stay at the center, depending on their condition. We also breed captive, we breed rare, threatened, and endangered wildlife species. We do this for giraffes, and we are now trying with the southern white rhino, which got extinct in the country. Through the efforts of various stakeholders, 2 rhinos were brought back into the country at the center where they are to restart the breeding process, but also some were taken to Zua Rhino Sanctuary, and now we have 39 at Zua Rhino Sanctuary, and they are breeding very well. So in total, we now have 41 southern white rhinos, southern white rhinos in the country. So basically, we are basically trying our best to be able to conserve, to educate about the wildlife in our care. One of the most critical aspects of zoos and aquariums today is that we understand there are zoos that are well off and there are those that are not well off, that are trying to come up, upcoming zoos. And to the visitor, there is no difference between the upcoming zoo and the zoo that is well off. So as the zoo and aquarium community, we are trying our best to ensure that we have collaboration among zoos to be able to support each other and to uplift the standard of animals in the zoos that are living in the world today. So at the recent World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, a paper was presented promoting twinning in zoos, where we want to have the zoos that are better off to uplift the upcoming zoos, so that we can ensure animal welfare in all our zoos. Regarding captive breeding, I want to mention one classical example where by 2006, the northern white rhinos were actually extinct in the wild. And the last surviving individuals in the zoos were sent to Olpejeta Conservancy in Kenya, and efforts are going on to save the species from extinction. The San Diego Zoo is working with the US Davis, Olpejeta, and other stakeholders to try and create northern white rhino embryos to be implanted in southern white rhinos using IVF to restore this species. Isn't that wonderful? And shows you actually the incredible amount of work that zoos are doing. We are also working at UA in community livelihoods improvement. We work hard to enhance community livelihoods for sustainable development, because however much we may try to put in much efforts in wildlife conservation, in environmental conservation, if we don't address the issue of livelihoods for the communities, we are wasting time, because at the end of the day, the communities are the stewards of these wildlife, but because they live just adjacent to the wildlife. So as the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, we have many programs that are helping us to promote community livelihoods, especially in Makanaga, where we are promoting the shoebill stock, and other areas where it is being promoted by the communities. We have set up trails in these areas, set up sanitary facilities. We have trained the communities. They have set up a users association, and now they are able to run their business by receiving tourists whom we refer to them. So through this and a number of initiatives, we have been able to promote community livelihoods. We are also involved in conservation lobbying and advocacy. You have not seen this photo, but here we are with Jane Goodall, who was last month at the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Center to launch the Roots and Shoots program, working with her and the Jane Goodall Institute in Uganda, where we are traversing the whole country, spreading the message of conservation. We are also involved in research. At the moment, we are working with the authorities in the country to actually provide chimpanzee poo, where the chimpanzee adenovirus is extracted to support the COVID vaccine research in the country. We are also involved in biobanking. Also San Diego Zoo last week, we were there and we actually visited the frozen zoo where biobanking is being done, and efforts to have embryos of the northern white rhino are in high gear to be able to see that this species does not disappear. We also do edutainment and recreation. And finally, we do a lot of partnerships for conservation, partnerships for the improvement of standards in zoos. And in summary, I would like to say that zoos are very, very important because they have the strength of receiving 1/10 of the world population. Over 700 million visitors visit our zoos and can be able to influence, inspire for positive conservation action, all this population. But also zoos have emerged as giants in terms of improving the economies of different countries because they offer employment, they offer tourism facilities. Like I've told you, many tourists that come to the natural landscapes have actually visited zoos and they get inspired to go and see these animals in the wild. And through that, they are contributing to tourism. In Uganda, for example, before COVID, tourism was the highest foreign exchange earner, and we are actually getting back to the map. Zoos are very good at influencing policy because of the strength of the zoos. When we put up policy statements, I want to give you an example. We were able to change the land use of Lutembe here, one of the Ramsar sites next to us. One investor was trying to fill up the wetland with maram, and we mobilized the communities, and through policymakers, we were able to stop this development. But also zoos are very good at species habitat conservation. Like I've told you, zoos are the 3rd largest funder of conservation in the world as we speak now. We offer a lot of education and training, scientific research, conservation finance, but also public health and well-being. The zoos are working hard to promote the One Health approach because we are all interconnected. the animals, the human beings, and the environment, and we must live together. So how do we work on our public health and well-being, as well as animal health, so that we can be able to coexist? So I would like to conclude my talk by thanking you so much for listening to me. But I would like to say that the future of life on Earth depends on our ability to take action, as quoted by Sir David Attenborough. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, James. Tinka, it's all you.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to start by commenting about the video, the opening video, the intro video that was played, defining conservation. In fact, that led to this program, Unite for the Environment, to start, because I personally had that issue of defining conservation. You heard how people struggled in English, because in our local language, the Runyaktara language, we don't even have a sentence to define what conservation means. You have maybe to write pages to explain to someone who is like 80 years old in order for them to understand what conservation means. Because, you know, a few years ago, people lived and hunted, like let's say 100 years ago, people lived and hunted and gathered, and it was fine because the population was still small. Today, the population in Uganda has increased, and because of that, we needed to define conservation and start doing conservation work. So I liked the intro video, and I had to say something about it. Now, Unite for the Environment is not a zoo, but it's a program of North Carolina Zoo. This is a Ugandan-based field, one of the field programs of the zoo. The zoo has programs in other countries, in other African countries, but this is one of them. And Unite was founded about 20 years ago. We work with schools and local communities around protected areas in Uganda. We've spent all those years, 20 years, working around Kebala National Park. We've done some work around Bwindi, Gorena National Park. 2019, we started working around Queen Elizabeth National Park. Unite works through schools, and currently we are working with 12 schools around Kebala National Park and 14 schools around Queen Elizabeth National Park. We reach out to 350 teachers who, again, reach out to about 10,000 students on a daily basis. So the impact is actually very wide. We promote conservation service projects that are aimed at conserving wildlife habitats and species therein. We do evaluate our program. We make sure that we evaluate everything. We evaluate activities and the broader program. This was all about Unite. You can see the children in that watching a film. So we also show films. We produce entertainment films that children can watch and learn and ask questions. We do have conservation events, like where you see the Rethink, Recycle, Remove. That was on Earth Day. We celebrate Earth Day, and we partner with other programs. We've worked with Uganda Wildlife Education Center to celebrate these conservation events. So we do promote them as well. These are some of the projects that we do in the community. We try and promote human-wildlife coexistence, because in around a protected area like Queen Elizabeth, which has cats in it, lions, leopards, and of course other animals, it's a savanna park. Communities around it, some of them are pastoralists, and they keep cattle. So it's a challenge when cats come out into the community and kill some of the cows for the pastoralists. So we do design some activities that we implement in this community to try and promote coexistence. And one of the things that we do is supporting these families to build strong kraals so that their animals can be protected mainly during the night when they are not out grazing. Next. We promote sustainable projects in the community because what we do is we look at the conservation challenges of a certain protected area, let's say Kibale National Park, and we design trainings to address these conservation challenges. And then we follow up these trainings with projects. One of the projects that we've done is promoting beekeeping, where farmers can keep bees and earn money from them. Beehives have also been used to deter big mammals like elephants from coming out of the national park to raid people's crops. So we support communities, support families to do beekeeping. In one of those images, you see two stoves. One is the traditional 3-stone stove, and the other one is a fuel-efficient stove, where we support communities to build them. In fact, here we were doing an experiment where we were comparing the two stoves. And we do these experiments during trainings when we're working with teachers. We also do them when we are working with communities, doing extension work in the community, to try to show these communities how the fuel-efficient stove actually saves wood practically. Because if you just tell them, they may not actually take it serious. But if they see it, and the last experiment we did, in fact, we boiled beans, and the 3-stone used 9 pieces of wood. The fuel-efficient stove used 2 pieces of wood. And that was very good for the community. They take it and they understand, and they go out and roll these stoves out. In fact, some of the children from our schools have used this, have started building these stoves for the households in the community to earn money. They get money, but also we are saving our environment. In one of the other pictures down here, this is sustainable agriculture. We are training in sustainable agriculture, and we are showing teachers how to do composting. Because traditionally people think if you get trash and throw it in a bin, biodegradable trash, and throw it in a pit, pick it out after a few weeks, and that's composting. But we're trying to actually show them what composting is, and they go through the entire process. Next. In our community now, we have conservation role models. I personally am a Disney conservation hero. We have this young man down here. When we went to the school in 2014 and asked what each child wanted to become, this child was in primary 3, in year 3, and he wanted to become a ranger. In fact, last year he completed his studies at the Uganda Wildlife Training Institute in Kasese, and now he's a ranger. So he wanted to do it like many years ago, more than 15 years ago, and now he's here. He's already a ranger. This is my team. These are me with my colleagues. We were at the African Primatological Society conference at UWEC in Entebbe. This is Dr. Musinguzi's place. So we actually have role models. My colleague Bruce, who is the extreme left, extreme right here, is also a Disney conservation hero. So we've actually done a lot to promote conservation and to breed young children to grow up with the love for conservation and promote this in the community. Next. We promote conservation awareness. Top left, you see these are teachers. we actually take them to the field, we take them to the forest, so that they can see these animals, because people used to think that these chimpanzees, these primates, these national parks are for tourists. It's only Muzungu who can come and afford to go there. Most of the interaction they've had with the park has been negative, like going there to hunt or to steal firewood or to steal a tree. So we want to break that and take them in so that they can be received. They can also be taken to see these animals. And once they see them, then it's actually good. They feel they are part of it. They feel it's also theirs. In between here, where you see teachers and students in life jackets, here we had taken them to Queen Elizabeth National Park, and they were on a boat ride. So learning, but as well as having fun. This is a place where none of them, including a teacher, would have gone without the support of North Carolina Zoo through our Unite program. Down here is the teacher training, where we actually use learner-centered teaching techniques to train teachers, and so that they can actually understand and go and use the same techniques in the classes when they are teaching. Below in the center, this is one of the radio programs. So we go on the radio, and we don't actually go. It's only one of the team members that go. We take teachers, we take children to go and present these radio programs so that they can talk to the public. Instead of us telling the public, they are hearing it from the learners. It's like, it's easier for them to understand and take the message. Next. We do not do it alone. We work with a number of partners. For example, we work with the Uganda Wildlife Authority. We work with the Uganda Wildlife Education Center. We work with so many other stakeholders. So we don't do it alone. We work with other people. Recently, we were in Rwanda attending the ICCB. We attending the ICCB conference. We celebrate Earth Days. We engage Nature for Kids, a Holland organization, to produce our films so that we can take them to the schools and train kids, show kids. So actually, we also work with the Lion Landscapes in Tanzania, the Danfoss in Rwanda. So we work with a number of stakeholders because we can't do it alone. We are not experts in everything. We have to consult and we have to partner with other people. Next. Yeah, that's it from me. I wanted to run through it and keep it brief so that I've seen people starting to get late and run away. Thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you, all of you, for an incredible presentation. Yeah, I think we're a little bit over time, which is fine, because I think when it's a good presentation, and we still have over 60 people in the room, down from about 80. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to go straight into the questions. Molly, the first one is for you from Ulrico. Thanks for the presentation. There's two questions. You mentioned a big focus on evolving and remaining relevant. How is Denver Zoo doing this for a modern world? And what is it that's being changed significantly, for the first question?
Great question. Not sure I can sum it up quickly, but I think where I would like to focus that question is on our field conservation work. So historically, how our organization has approached our field conservation projects. Those projects and those species were usually identified by personal relationships, who knew someone somewhere, who was someone's postdoc. We didn't necessarily apply a lot of decision-making filters, one of which being largest conservation impact and need, to how we chose priority species or projects. Also, how we decided to put our resources. I think for us as an organization, how we have evolved and remained relevant is that we are leading now with identifying where's the greatest conservation need, where, so looking at under-resourced landscapes, under-resourced organizations or practitioners or communities, and where is our resources or our expertise going to benefit that. So being very strategic in where we choose to partner, how we support, and really leading with conservation impact, not necessarily opportunity, if that makes sense. So I think that's one way we are staying relevant, as well as our field conservation work. We have put a much larger emphasis on our local conservation work. For so long, all of our conservation efforts were international, which in many ways that sometimes can perpetuate some of those colonial practices. So we want to, that relevancy, I think, is going to be most important, is how we can engage our guests and the communities directly surrounding our organization here in metro area Denver to our local conservation efforts. There's so much happening within the state of Colorado regarding carnivore conflict and climate change that I think that is how we are remaining relevant for our own immediate communities here in Denver and Colorado by highlighting and engaging in local conservation work and being, again, very strategic in how we do that.
Thank you, Molly. And I'm going to go straight on to Ulrico's second question, because he's actually in the business of empathy. So he wants to know if you've done any studies on the empathy that you have fostered being a zoo, and how do you quantify that?
That is an excellent question. In fact, there is a network. I'm glad you asked this question, because if you're in the business of empathy, then I hope I can share some resources with you to help. I personally was not a part of the team that did that work, that research. That was our community research and evaluation team, but we are part of a greater network that is led by the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. And so it's called the ACE program, or the Advancing Conservation Through Empathy Network. So it was a collective effort of over 20 zoos and aquariums to do just that, make those correlations between empathy in zoos and how that then builds conservation ethos or creates change. So I was not on the ins and outs of that particular research, but I do recommend that you look up the ACE program, and it's through Woodland Park Zoo, and it's on their website. That should have all the resources, the findings from those organizations, and we do continue to do empathy work and embed it into our programming here at the zoo. That is the short answer.
Thank you. And I think, Ulrico, please feel free to contact Molly and to take that further. Roland, I'm going to ask you to unmute there, because you can ask your question directly. And then Umo, I will come to you, followed by you, Emlyn.
Good evening. For Molly, I just want to support the role of zoos. I'm a protected area manager in Angola. And when I was a teenager, very idealistic, everything was born free. I was totally against zoos. And then when I became a conservation professional, I worked with Ian Player. I actually took over from him as director of the Wilderness Leadership School. And I was part of the Natal Parks Board team that captured white rhino, southern square-lipped rhino. And then we moved them to San Diego. So that was to get all of we had like 100, the last square-lipped rhino, white rhino left on the planet. And we decided to move them, and we moved them to zoos so that they could be moved out of areas in Africa if there was a catastrophic collapse of the population, which unfortunately is happening at the moment. And the roles of zoos, and then also we brought back Cape buffalo, which are disease-free. And that's been a hugely important thing in zoos, bringing back animals that were disease-free, because they've been there for generations. So just to support that. And I'm an associate of your colleague, Lynn, so please give her my regards.
Lynn's desk is right next to mine. So thank you, Roland. I will be sure to say that. And thank you very much for your support. And yes, like I said, not all zoos are alike, and some have the resources to do demonstrative, amazing efforts like you just talked about. So many zoos have been collaborators in truly bringing back species from extinction. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Roland. Umo, I'm asking you to unmute there. If you can click that. Yes, over to you, Umo.
Thank you so much for the opportunity given. My name is Umo Iswaiko. I'm the coordinator of Peace Point Development Foundation. It's an NGO working on environmental justice in Nigeria. I am so privileged to be a participant of this great discussion. As a student of environmental protection and resource management years back in my university, I did my research was on the impacts of Cross River National Park on wildlife conservation. But today, that park is just a mere monument. The past state governments created a pathway called superhighway to construct a superhighway inside the park. So many of these species are no more there. And recently, some communities in northern Cross River State in Nigeria are being affected by elephants and other wild animals who ran away from those parks. And they are threatening lives and also destroying properties in terms of crops of the communities. So in this avenue, what do you think we can do? Secondly, as a resident of Calabar, Cross River State for years, when I grew up, I saw a very big park, zoo here in Calabar. But today, we don't have even one animal to conserve, meaning that our children will only see those animals on papers and Facebooks. Reality is not this. So please, what do you think we can do in order to bring back our past glory? Thank you.
I think, James, that's perhaps a question for you and Tinker. If you want to come in first, James.
Thank you very much for that great question, Umo. In Uganda, what you actually describing are also typical here, where, like I mentioned, we have human-wildlife conflicts, and there are all efforts to actually promote human-wildlife coexistence through various initiatives. First of all, promotion of collaborative park management. There must be a carrot and stick approach, because traditionally it has been about protectionism. The gun is here, no community member is allowed to enter the park. And so there is even animosity between the park authorities and the communities. Time has come for the community to be involved in the management of the park, for them to appreciate the role of the park. For example, in Uganda, there are some incentives. We have put up what we call multiple use donations in some parks, where some communities are allowed to go into the park and harvest non-timber forest products, for example. And also 20% of the gate collection goes back to the communities for them to be able to build their communities using that 20% of the tourist revenue. So through these initiatives, you are able to support the communities, for example, to put beehives along the park boundary, because animals like elephants don't cross. They fear bees, they sting them, so they remain in the park. But also construction of trenches that can deter elephant from crossing, but also planting unpalatable crops along the park boundaries, so that then the animals cannot cross from the park to the communities. So there is a lot that can be done, but it starts with involving the community in the management of the park, so that they can see some benefits that accrue, so that then they can be able to appreciate the resources and then protect them, and even devise means together with the park authorities to be able to deter some of these challenges from happening. But Tinker, you can add on, especially from your presentation, you've worked directly with this.
Okay, thank you, Uma, for the question. I think the power of education and awareness is actually very, very important, again, within the community, because it takes long to change people's attitudes, which in most cases translate into behavior. So working with the communities to change their attitudes so that they can look at these natural resources and understand why they are there and how they are important for their livelihoods. One of the things we've done in our community is promoting ecotourism. We have a wetland in our community, and we promote ecotourism. So the money that comes from tourists is all spent on to address community needs. And then by doing that, the communities appreciate this wetland and they actually value it, and it's everyone's effort to conserve it. So once the communities are seeing the benefits from conservation, then they will try as much as possible to conserve it. One strength that you have, Umo, is I can see you have the charisma, you have the attachment, and take that on, carry it on, lead the community, consult people outside, you get ideas, lead the community, you'll be a role model, and you can change this. Just have the patience, because this cannot be done overnight. You may need, 5, 6, 10 years, but I promise you'll get there. I've been doing this for the last 30 years, which is half of my life, and I'm not regretting.
Thank you. And I think, Uma, if you'd like to be in direct contact with Tinker or James, please do contact the LCA and we will put you in contact there. So thank you for that wonderful question. Emlyn, over to you.
Thanks very much. I'd like to just link an observation about today's Unlocking Nature presentation and some data about the state of biodiversity and a question of the speakers, if they wish. My observation is that it's quite a striking contrast, isn't it, I would say, between what are routinely the presentations in this LCA Unlocking Nature series, where we get treated to up close and personal contact between humans and non-human life in the field. Today's presentation that takes us inside zoo environments stands as a striking contrast that reminds us about the state of the world, which leads me to my data point. Apparently the world contains some 6 million species, of which Homo sapiens, humans, are but one. We used to be a few species of the genus Homo, and we're one of 6,000 mammal species. But here we are talking in the world so much about human diversity and not so much about the natural biodiversity of the entire planet, both animal and plant, marine and terrestrial. And so, when we talk about zoos, my question, and this is a concern I have, I grew up in England loving to go to places like the London Zoo, but now I can't go to places like the London Zoo because I'm sort of ethically concerned, not to be too high horse about this, but I don't find that zoos are giving me the picture that, for example, an IMAX film could give me about a whole ecosystem or a documentary on television. And what I'm referring to is that even in accredited zoos, it's rare to get an introduction to the species on display that gives any amount of ecological and population data about the species in question. We get to know what it's called, where it lives, how it lives, and what it eats. But as a sample of the given species in the wild, we really get very little, if ever, any data about the context of the species, given that humans have brought about a 6th extinction and have rendered many species of reptiles, mammals, birds, amphibia already extinct. They're gone, they're gone, they're gone. And so I'm concerned that zoos are not taking advantage of educating what really must be the most biggest area of ignorance by people who will rarely see any of these animals in the wild, by acquainting them with what is the actual percent abundance of the remaining species in the wild. I'll stop my comment and question there.
Molly, perhaps this is a look at the Western style zoo.
First of all, thank you very much for that question. And if it helps, that is something that those of us working in zoos, we grapple with all of the time. So during my presentation, I talked about how do we balance all of these different value systems visitors coming to us. And when I talk about value systems, we also have to include learning styles and how people receive information, the type of information we should, as a science-based organization, we should be providing. And we are constantly having to balance that. We conduct our own research on just how do people receive information, what type of information they want to receive, and what's the best methodology to give that information. And zoos all over the world do similar research to this. And just like conservation, there's not one intervention that's going to solve or help reduce a threat. So zoos are constantly trying multiple interventions and strategies of how we engage our visitors to provide them that exact information you were talking about. If we are an education organization and we are a science organization, we should be providing that type of level of content. However, that is difficult when you have a variety of visitors who are of different ages, different backgrounds. English isn't necessarily their first language. So how do we convey all of this messaging without overwhelming them? So we have to do it in a couple different ways. So yes, there is signage and interpretive messaging in that regard, but we also know that there's research that says people do not read them. And so that becomes difficult. So then what are some other avenues? So we too provide films on our campus where we can provide higher level content in longer spans, in an environment that allows people to stay focused and engaged for long enough to receive that information. We have interpretive talks. We have our own different versions of storytelling. We do it through our exhibits. So I agree with you. This is difficult of how do we really emphasize the immediacy and the urgency of the threats facing global biodiversity. But we also have to balance that with all of the different types of people coming to our organization. And we also have to recognize that we are not always preaching to the choir. Not everybody coming to our organization wants to hear all of that information or is able or ready to receive a lot of that information during their visit. So you bring up a very good point, and it is something we constantly are researching, and it is something we are constantly trial and erroring to see what works and what doesn't. And we are researching when we try something new, a new strategy or intervention, to share that level of content and urgency of information. How is it received? I wish I had a better answer for you, but we agree that is one of the many purposes we should be serving as an education and science-based organization. But we have a lot that we're having to balance, and so we're not just getting adults who are able to hear that level of content or even want to hear it. We have to think of families and small children. And like I said, where English is not the first language. So there's a lot that we have to balance in order to share that level of information.
Holly, could I ask a supplementary question, if I may? Yes. What I'd like to say is that, there's beyond sort of an audience reaction and surveys of what audiences who may not know very much about much of this at all, what they think they want. One of the biggest decisions and the boldest decisions, and I agree how complex these questions are, is not to exhibit an animal anymore. We can look at aquaria that have stopped having killer whales leap out of small tanks. We've stopped circuses from having elephants balance on things and Bengal tigers leaping through flaming hoops. Urban zoos, because of concern of pollution and unnatural weather systems that are unnatural to the natural ecology of the animal, have stopped having elephants. And now the elephants have been given the rest of their lives to live out in a sort of a more therapeutic resting place, a bit like an old age person's home, where the care is of the utmost. So I think one of the choices, difficult as it may be, is to stop exhibiting the animal and replace where the animal used to be exhibited with explanations of what the decision was and why and how and where, and to point people to the alternative ways of learning about the species that may have formerly been on exhibit, but was very unhappy or was not procreating or did not live a natural lifespan or was clearly showing psychotic behavior. So I think we've got to be bold, and zoos sometimes will have to make the tough choices not to exhibit the animal anymore, especially if it's so-called charismatic megafauna.
Not sure if you were wanting a response to that, but I would like to, if we have
Please.
time.
Well, I mean, certainly I'd be interested. But that's the end of my question.
I think, again, that is a philosophical question those of us in the zoo and aquarium industry, we asked ourselves as well. In an ideal world, we shouldn't need zoos. But I think part of the evolution of zoos has been in how we care, and the habitats that we create for the animals that we are fully committed to. And so we do have animals in our care that are able to thrive and live beyond years that they might not live in the wild because they don't have those same pressures. They have extraordinary veterinary care. And so we're able to provide them the care that allows them to thrive in our organizations, not just survive, but thrive. And so, yes, I agree. Zoos do need to be bolder, and we are doing that. The evolution of exhibits and the use of architecture and how we are using our research and behavioral husbandry is driving that evolution. So ensuring that the exhibits we are designing and building are promoting the most naturalistic behavior from these animals and the use of behavioral husbandry techniques such as behavioral enrichment. So we have evolved in that sense, and these are questions that zoos are asking themselves. If we do not have the full scope of resources, then should we be having these animals in our care? So if it helps, those conversations on a very large scale are happening, but the reality is we need zoos right now. It's not an option to just retire them to sanctuaries or to put them into the wild when we know landscapes and habitats are, the erosion of them is accelerating. So the truth is we need zoos right now. So we'd rather collaborate with our partners and continue that evolution so that we can provide the utmost highest care for the animals that we're committed to from birth to death, but also how are we also expanding our purpose to ensure that for future generations, for all of biodiversity, we are protecting and restoring the natural landscapes that their counterparts come from.
Thank you, Molly. And I certainly know, we might go to the zoo and see a monkey and we think it's the same monkey every time, but there are places where they're swapped out so they can go and be away from the prying public eye. And then it's actually a different individual there. And of course, a lot of these animals in Africa, at least, come from trafficking. So these are places where zoos create this sanctuary. James, a question to you from Neil. He wants to know, how would you determine enclosure size in your zoo? Especially because it's Uganda, I'm adding this on. Because how do you decide land size, land titles? How do you determine the size of that enclosure?
Thank you very much, Holly. And thank you very much for that question. Like I told you, we are members of the Pan-African Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And under this umbrella body, standards have been developed in terms of enclosure sizes, depending on the species that you are dealing with. And so there is specific reference. Right now, UWEC, my zoo, has actually been audited by the Pan-African Zoo Association and found to be the best in East, West, and Central Africa as a result of following the procedures, protocols, safety protocols and procedures, but also the size of the enclosures, depending on the species. So there is proper guidance from the Pan-African Association of Zoo and Aquariums, and whatever zoo comes up in the country, we actually encourage them to be able to join this association so that the standards of animals in terms of animal enclosures, in terms of the population and species management, depending on the land size, is really adhered to, because those are the particular areas that the audits will be looking out for, but also capacity building, because we have set up a capacity building program under the African Zoo Association in terms of enclosure sizes. When somebody applies, for example, for a permit, we go and inspect the land, because there is a minimum size of land that we can actually allow to have a zoo. So it's basically standards that have been set by the Pan-African Zoo Association, and we've been evolving with the time. And so we actually redid all our enclosures basing on the natural ecosystems of the country. So we recreated the ecosystems of Uganda at UWEC in Entebbe. When you come, you're able to see animals in a savanna ecosystem, in a forest ecosystem, in a wetland ecosystem, but also the lake. So it is basically reinventing the old zoo into a new modern zoo now, which has exhibits and grasslands that mimic what is in the wild in order to achieve the 5 degrees of freedom of the animal. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And I can also say from personal visits to Entebbe for the last 15 years, and also the Nairobi orphanage, as it was called, for all of my life, so sadly nearly 40 years, there have been huge changes, developments, and a huge look at the welfare of the animals. Sammy, I'm asking you to unmute there if you'd like to ask your question, and then I will come to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. My name is Sammy. I've lived in Uganda and I've taught in university in Uganda. Currently, I'm teaching in a University of Tourism in Rwanda, and I have some 2 concerns that I will directly talk about WEC, that is the former zoo. There is a misconception there of the titles between an educational center and a zoo. So that should be at least be rectified. I will want to hear from Dr. James. The second issue is an edutainment, an educational entertainment. And my concern is the location of the swimming pool at the Entebbe Zoo. As a person enters the entrance, there are several 2-3 buildings, and then the swimming pool comes in the first. Where do we differentiate between the entertainment center and then the wildlife stalls and exhibitions? And then lastly, I come from Rwanda currently, where I'm teaching tourism, and we do not have any zoo. So any of the presenters, how can we develop a zoo in the countries where zoos are not there, but they have all the wildlife that should be at least exhibited? I submit. Thank you.
Can I respond, Holly?
Yes, Dave. Sorry, I saw you'd unmuted. Go for it, James.
Yeah, this is James. Thank you very much, Sammy, for your concern. It is the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center. It's an education center with objectives and mandates that I mentioned that include conservation education, focusing on environmental education and education for sustainable development, rescue and rehabilitation of wildlife, captive breeding of endangered wildlife species. But the traditional name has been Entebbe Zoo, and the change of name came up in 1994. So one of the challenges we have is that when you talk about this long name, the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, many people fail to understand that it's actually referring to former Entebbe Zoo. So we coin it Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, former Entebbe Zoo, as a way of clarifying to the clients for them to know that we are talking about Entebbe Zoo in Iwe, former Entebbe Zoo. Otherwise, people confuse the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center with the Uganda Wildlife Authority. So we add Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center, former Entebbe Zoo, in order to clarify that we are actually meaning the place in Entebbe. Concerning the location of the swimming pool, we have a master plan that we are following. And what we have done is to separate the animal exhibits from the children play area. If you've been keen, the children play area is on your way down towards the beach. And the animal exhibits that have been recreated using Uganda's ecosystem are on another side. And this actually helps us to be able to monitor our animals in terms of the level of cortisol or stress in them, because the play is far much lower below than where the animal exhibits are. So we located them the way we did, following the master plan that is in place. Regarding a zoo in Rwanda or wildlife center in Rwanda, we are happy to support in terms of capacity building. I think you could approach your government and interest them. We are here next door in Uganda. We are happy to provide capacity for you to develop one in Rwanda. You could come up with a proposal to fundraise or to propose, especially if you have challenges like we have of human-wildlife conflicts, animal wildlife trafficking, poaching, where inevitably there are animals that would be saved other than leaving them to die. We are happy to provide capacity to set up one. Thank you.
I think just to come in there in terms of building up a zoo, I'm not sure Rwanda would be the place, because your national parks are so tiny and are such islands in a sea of civilization. They are themselves zoos. They are wildlife education centers. So the capacity building would be in taking people into those islands that exist still and are so critical to, for example, the fresh water that Rwandans are able to drink. If you got rid of Nungwe National Park, that's it. You know, you're going to put a whole load of people out of fresh water. So you already have zoos without fences. You need to build your capacity to take people into those areas and see the animals in their natural habitat. And that would be something very special indeed. In fact, that would be redefining the word zoo in so many ways. Mike, if you can unmute, over to you for your question.
Right, thank you. First, if I could make a comment in support of zoos. I had the privilege of spending some time in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and elsewhere, and I saw the magnificent Arabian oryx in the wild. And as you know, this was the first animal to be successfully reintroduced into its original habitat after being declared extinct in the wild in 1972. And there are now over 1,600 of the animals running wild. Another great example is Przewalski's horse, which from a handful of animals, 12 individuals, has now been restocked. And there are many other great examples of the role of zoos of saving animals from extinction, such as the red wolf, the California condor, the golden lion tamarin, the Amur leopard, and so on and so on. But these are all conservation success stories based on individual species. The environmental crisis has reached such a level now that we need to move beyond only conservation of species and looking also at the conservation of essential ecological processes and life support systems. And I wonder, what role are zoos playing in looking at that bigger picture? And I think the example from Rwanda that you gave just now is very relevant to that.
Yes, well, thank you, Mike. And I think when you look at these success stories of animals reintroduced, and I'm going to put over to Molly here, who can give you a few examples, they're actually critical. We could not have reintroduced some of those animals back into Africa without the help of zoos. Molly, over to you.
Yes, excellent point, Mike, and I agree. I can't speak for all zoos. I can say for our zoo, we have also revisioned how we approach our field conservation projects, and that we are approaching them more from a landscape approach, knowing there will be umbrella species that fall into that landscape, and looking at how we are identifying those landscapes. So as I mentioned, those under-resourced landscapes. And I think this is a good opportunity to demonstrate how zoos can be better partners. So even though we are wildlife organizations and that is our expertise, it makes sense for us to find a species, a flagship species that we promote our efforts around. But like you talked about, it's more at the landscape and all of those ecological processes and systems that are also being lost. And so we had a Mongolia program for 25 years. And probably, I would say, one of the largest measures of success for us in the partnership that we have with the Mongolian government and other organizations on the ground there was that our research, and this is often the, it's important to distinguish research from conservation. We need that research to inform conservation decision-making. So how did we use the research that Denver Zoo and our colleagues were collecting to inform change? And so we were helpful in getting park boundaries expanded in order to protect Argali sheep that we've, following their movement. And we saw where they were no longer protected. So I know that's on a very micro level, but I think that's where zoos can really evolve and put more of their resources of, if we've got these research resources, we should be using that research to inform large-scale change in that regard, policy, legislation, and how these under-resourced areas are being managed, protected, as well as we need to be more integrative and holistic in our approaches. So no longer just working from an ecological lens, but how are we integrating public health? How are we integrating social science? How can we be approaching all the threats that are facing wildlife, but also are threats facing people? And I think that's also been an evolution in zoos and how we approach conservation, both on our campus and in our field programs, is that we are looking at this through a systems approach and no longer just a conservation biology lens. So I'll say it again, not all zoos have all the same resources, and we can only do what we can, but I think it's going back to us being much more strategic and having a shared vision in how we identify those landscapes, where those conservation needs are, and what are all those drivers that are degrading biodiversity, and how do we carve out our niche in that? Because I think it was James who just said we can't be everything to everyone, and we have to recognize that. We want to be, but we can't. So how are we smart in our partnerships? How are we realistic about the resources we have to give? And how are we putting all of those resources in where there's the greatest conservation need and feasibility for success? And I think that's just a start for us when we want to look at, from an ecosystem or landscape level. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Mike, but that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Holly, if I could just point out in the chat box, I've raised another point which James might want to have a look at or perhaps correspond with me on. It refers to the stepwise education system that they've introduced. And I've come up with a similar thing called the education information value chain, where we take people from information to knowledge to wisdom to changing their mindset to changing their behavior, and finally to influencing others to change their mindset and behavior. And it's something I developed in the Science Center museum community, but I think it's equally applicable in zoos and aquaria.
Yes, and I think Maret will hand out all of these comments to all of the panel of speakers, so definitely. And Mike, I already use your method now in my teaching, and it's incredible. So James, I do encourage you to get hold of Mike. And for everybody here, Molly actually has to duck out now. We have hit the 2-hour mark, which is all right, because we did think this would create discussion. So we're still here for those who, if James and Tinker can stay a little bit longer. I know Tinker in Bigodi, I visited Bigodi, they may not be, that easy to get home. So do let me know, Tinker, if you need to go. But Molly, thank you very much for being here. And if anybody wants to get hold of you, you have given your email address. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. I've just put a great resource in the chat as well. Mike, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it might be of interest to you as well. But please do reach out. Thank you again to my amazing colleagues. And thank you to the team at Conservation Leadership for Africa. This was a wonderful experience. And I'm sorry, I do have to go to another meeting, but I hope you do reach out. So thank you again.
Thank you, Molly. And James, if you could also contact Ulrico, because he is talking about the different technologies and strategies that have been implemented with the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund. Again, these comments will be sent to you by Mairet. So we just have a question, and I think Tinker and James, if you could each answer this individually, starting with you, Tinker. Do you have internship opportunities for overseas veterinary students? And I do highlight that word because I am very aware of what the impact of overseas volunteering does when we have in-country people who are needing internships as well. So please be free and open with your answer. Tinker, over to you.
Yep, thank you. I think this question should go to Dr. James because for us, we are a field program. And we take a systems approach. We're a program of North Carolina Zoo, and we take a systems approach. We don't work with species directly, and we don't have like any exhibits here in Uganda. Our zoo is in the US. So no for veterinary students.
James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Holly. Yes, we have a very strong local and international internship, as well as long-stay volunteer program, depending on somebody's interests. One of one of those that we have is actually for veterinary students or conservationists, educators, animal keepers. So there is this opportunity to come and take part in the way we care for the African species. So yes, we have those opportunities. We have veterinarians who will shadow the intern students or the long-stay volunteer. We have animal care nurses. We have hospital attendants. We have animal caregivers. So the infrastructure is in place. We actually have accommodation on site where we work out a particular package and suggest it to the person who is interested. Yes, the opportunities are there for both local students as well as international students.
Thank you, James. And before you unmute, we have Emmanuel Ngumbi here, who actually runs the Giraffe Center in Nairobi. And he would like to know how UEC is building the capacity of young Africans who are in tertiary institutions in ways that will allow them to be future leaders in conservation.
Thank you very much from Giraffe Center. You have an incredible facility. I admire it. I've been there. Thank you for the great work you're doing there. Yes, UEC is working in the country, first of all, on site, like I said, but also during using an outreach approach. We partner with the Wildlife Clubs of Uganda. The Wildlife Clubs of Uganda has a strong presence in schools in Uganda. And these wildlife clubs are actually going out to schools. So we've actually given a special fee for entrance into the center by the Wildlife Club members in the schools where they stay. So we empower them through that. We also carry out children conservation education camps where they come, we take them through a week-long camp. They are doing journals in the morning. They are studying particular species. They are feeding animals. Very, very interesting. So there are so many initiatives, right from working in the schools where we go, working in partnership with the Wildlife Clubs of Uganda. We also have an active partnership with the Roots and Shoots program of the Jane Goodall Institute. Jane Goodall was here last month to launch the Jane Goodall Institute Center at UEC. and that is also having a very strong presence in the young population. So by receiving the young people at the center who come in to be educated randomly, but also having specific programs on site for young people, like I've said, the children conservation education camps. We run tree planting campaigns and education for nurseries for the young people. Then we also go out and meet them in schools, working with the wildlife clubs of Uganda. We involve them in journal writing, quiz, debates, doing conservation. We also have active participation during special days, Environment Day, World Wildlife Day. We go to schools and working with districts, the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, and the Uganda Wildlife Authority. We take part in so many activities, but also the internship program is very powerful. And what we do normally, when somebody does well, because our work is mainly about passion, so we observe somebody during internship, and once they're in the final year, those who have got passion towards wildlife conservation, we retain them and employ them actually within the volunteer program. We have a very strong volunteer program, and now we are using this volunteer program actually to even find jobs for these young people. Initially, it was a challenge. By having very well-trained staff, they would be given better opportunities in the United Arab Emirates, in the USA and South Africa. So we started a very strong volunteer program where we now pick and recommend young people to go and work in these countries. Yes, that is powerful. We have also formed the Zoo Animal Keepers Association of Uganda. This one is attracting the young people, both from secondary and tertiary institutions, as well as the captive wildlife facilities that exist in the country. And so this one also nurtures them. It creates passion, hands-on, in terms of wildlife conservation and care for the animals. And this all builds their capacity to find jobs when they are ready after their school.
Thank you for that, James. And Emmanuel, I'm actually going to unmute you because we have 3 more questions remaining. One is from Emmanuel in the chat. So Emmanuel, perhaps you can just ask it in person if you're there. I've asked you to unmute. Wonderful. Go for it, Emmanuel.
Hi, Holly.
Hi.
And the team. I joined a little bit late, but I'm happy Dr. Msugu has been able to answer my question. And the last bit, I know most of the nature education centers, because we use tourism as part of our fundraising efforts, most of them, they are suffering much from trying to balance between the numbers coming in, what they are generating, and also the welfare of the animals. And just like Gerald said, I'm sure HUEC might also be experiencing the same. There are times you get so many schools, but having them come in and walk out the same way they came to the zoo or to a nature education center, then it doesn't really pay much benefits when you think about the future where we want to sustain and educate those students so that they can be able to change their mindset. So I was wondering how HUEC is trying to manage the numbers coming in and also trying to also stay afloat in terms of the income they are generating from tourism. So how do you check on the tourist numbers coming in as well as the students numbers coming to the zoo in a given time or in a given day or week, so that at least by the time they leave, you're able to create that impact in them or to change their mindset for future sustainability? Thank you.
Can I go for it, Holly?
Yes, go for it, James.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And again, thank you for the great work you're doing at Giraffe Center. One of the mechanisms we are using is to ensure that the schools do book. They book so that we know how many schools are coming on a particular day. However, we also struggle in some cases, especially over the weekend, like on a Friday. Everybody wants to come on a Friday so that they are able to rest over the weekend. So you have this painful decision of saying, oh, sorry, we have to cut now from here. These are the numbers that we can manage. Otherwise, it can be very, very overwhelming. And in fact, one of the shock absorbers that we have is the government of Uganda, because we are government supported. So the government of Uganda gives us, because I know how expensive it is to manage a captive wildlife facility where you have to feed all the animals, pay the staff, maintain the aesthetics of the place. It's not cheap at all. But we are lucky that the government comes in to be able to supplement our income. In fact, all the income we get at the gate, we don't touch it. We just directly bank it into the consolidated fund. We have a bank at the center that has introduced online platforms, cash. So we don't touch that money. It is banked directly to the consolidated fund, and we make a yearly budget, and releases are made to us on a quarterly basis. So the government comes in, we tell them our needs, and they fund them, regardless of how much money we could have collected, because government is taking this as an education service to Ugandans. We are not earning money or providing a service of tourism to be able to earn from it, but rather provide an education service to Ugandans in terms of creating awareness about the value of biodiversity. So the government has come in handy. One of the other options we are putting in place to reduce the pressure is to set up regional conservation centers. At the moment, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the National Forest Authority, which manages urban forest reserves in the country. So they have given us land in Gulu, which is in northern Uganda, in western Uganda, and eastern Uganda, to be able to set up miniature centers like we have in Entebbe, so that people who are in those regions don't have to come all the way to Entebbe. They can be able to enjoy and learn and enjoy the tourism from those regions. And we think that this one is going to be a great game changer in terms of promoting tourism in these areas, promoting conservation education in these areas, but also reducing the pressure on the center in Entebbe. We also have...
Oh, sorry, James, continue.
Sorry. I wanted to mention the great potential we have in terms of the partners. We have been able to build a great extent of social capital, and we have individuals and companies and the private sector who actually bring physical food, which we check, and if it's suitable for animals, we serve it to the animals.
Okay, we appear to have lost James's audio for the moment. So we do have a question from Arnold. So Tinker, I'm not sure if you can answer this or have a go at it. Arnold wants to know if you have ex situ conservation and you want to reintroduce those species to their original ecosystems, then their behaviors when they were in confinement must have been interfered with. So how do you make sure that the survival rates are good, more so in diet, predation and survival? Perhaps, Tinker, you've had experience with birds you've had to release in Bigodi wetlands.
Okay. Yeah, I see Dr. Tadeo's hand up, so possibly he's trying to answer this question. That's my guess. But what I know is that at UWEC, they actually have a monitoring program where they monitor these animals before they are released. And like Dr. James said, not every individual bird or animal can be released, because sometimes you have those that you see they cannot actually survive in the wild, and those are retained. Those are the ones that they can put on exhibitions and be exhibited. But if they are ready and seen as fit to be released and they can survive in the wild, then they are released. The other person that can answer this question, I see his hand up, is David Musingo, who is also from UWEC. He works closely with James. So,
Holly, I'm back. What's the question, please?
Okay, well, hang tight, James. I've just asked David to unmute simply because I hear he works with you. So the question came from Arnold in regards to behavior changes. How do you know you can release an animal and that its behavior has not changed?
So David.
Hello.
Yes, David, we can hear you. Go ahead.
My name is David, the manager of Education and Information Department at UWEC Entebbe. Sorry, I came in late. I am attempting to answer the question, especially about releasing animals back into the wild. It also depends on the species. There are species that are easy to release back, especially the reptiles, but there are other species like birds, primates that are not easy. You have to introduce them slowly, take them. Like, for example, we had an experience of releasing parrots. We released quite a number of African gray parrots into Chivale National Park, but also on Ngamba Island. It is a process because we had to first build the aviary, an outside aviary for them to get used, to get customized. This aviary was in the forest, and they were able to interface even with other parrots from nature, free-ranging parrots. Then after that, we had to first go and build an aviary, a temporary aviary in Chivale. At times, some of them, we call them bombers. And then we released these parrots into this aviary, and we kept on giving food as we opened the holes after 3-4 days, and they started flying out at their leisure. Those that could not fly, we were able to monitor them for some days. Others left again, but some few remained, and we had to bring them back into Entebbe. And we have been rehabilitating them with other group of parrots. And when time comes, we shall make another attempt to release these parrots again. When it comes to other species, like the big cats, it's not easy. But what do we normally do is you build, especially still at tender age, you build a boma, and then they stay there, you feed them, you release them slowly. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money to release some of these species like elephants, baby elephants, the cats and others. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I think that brings us to the end of all of the questions and to the 2.5-hour mark. So thank you to the 25 people still here. We really, really appreciate it. And if there are requests for more such panels, especially if you'd want to learn about aquariums or perhaps even botanical gardens, because they are so critical, please do send us suggestions of what you want to hear on Unlocking Nature.